All right. How many of you thought that was ridiculous? Yeah, we did that on purpose. That's why. So we have launched into a teaching series that I guess really began 2 weeks ago, but last week things got real with our special guest that came in, who I'll reintroduce in just a moment. But we have been going through a teaching series called Answering the Atheist. And essentially our goal in this series has been to create you guys with in you guys, I should say, a confidence on how you engage with people that do not believe in the Christian faith. Maybe you get asked questions that you can't answer. And tonight we kind of use the video a little bit lighthearted, obviously, but also because sometimes it's difficult to know how to steer or navigate the conversation, how to respond to someone's question, how to be able to just basically come across as someone who's informed and you don't look dumb when you're trying to defend your faith. And I think we've all been in those moments, if you've ever had one of these conversations, where sometimes it can be intimidating. You're not really sure what to say. So if you were here last week, you will remember that we talked on the existence of God. So we began with a very broad focus last week. We don't have time to rehash that, but I would encourage you guys, if you have ever used the SoundCloud app, then please know these messages will also be on there. Some of you guys have asked, are we going to put these on SoundCloud? Yes. If you've never used it, it's a free app. Just search for Verve Youth Church, and you can hear the messages in their entirety. Also, we want to encourage you guys, just like we did last week, you can be a part of our conversation tonight. Well, what do you mean by that? Well, if you weren't here last week, something that we did that we will do tonight as well as next week is allow you guys to text in to the Remind app that we use, and we're going to send that out in just a moment. And by you simply responding to the text that we send out, it will send your questions in. And after Steve comes in a moment and does his presentation, what we will do after that is take questions that you guys have sent in, and we'll present those, and he will answer as many as we have time for. So if you want to be a part of that, it's really easy. If you've not already done this, the number you will send it to is 81010, 81010. And in the message part, you will put @TextVerve. It'll take you about 10 seconds. Do that quickly, because here in just a few minutes, we will send a text out. All you have to do is reply directly to that text, just like you would any other text message, and that will automatically send your question in. Again, we can't answer every single question, but a lot of times the questions are kind of repetitive, and we'll try to answer the ones that get asked the most. So if you have a question in relation to tonight's discussion, send that in, and Steve will do his best to answer that. So if you weren't here last week, let me reintroduce. I'm going to go ahead and invite him to come and get set up. Steve Lee is our guest who's been with us last week, tonight. We'll be back next week. He is a teacher at Prestonwood Christian Academy. He's been there 17 years, and he specializes. I can't talk tonight, guys. I don't know what's going on. I guess it's a good thing I'm not preaching tonight. I'm having some issues. He specializes, let me try it again, in what we call apologetics, which is a word we use in the church to basically just describe being able to defend your faith in what you believe. So he's going to talk to you tonight about the Bible. We're also going to be referred to his website. If you've not been to his website, it's amazing. You need to go and check it out. You'll hear more about that. But I'm going to shut up and get out of the way, because this is the man you all came to see. One more time, let's give a big Verve Youth Church welcome, Mr. Steve Lee.
Do you need him? We're good? All right. As he said, my name is Steve Lee, and I appreciate you bringing me back again, Hadley. In fact, let me ask, who was here last week, right? Who wasn't here last week? Tonight's your first night. Who doesn't respond to surveys? Right there, you got a smart one right there, man. So, seriously. But we're going to be talking about the Bible tonight. But last week we talked about God's existence and evidence for his existence. We had 3 different arguments for God's existence using the name of God, G-O-D. And shout it out. What does the G stand for? Good and evil. There is an objective morality in which society, individuals cannot establish. Only God can establish those objective morals out there. What's the O stand for? Origins of the universe. The universe had a beginning, and anything that has a beginning must have a cause, and therefore the universe has a cause, and that cause must be God, who has divine attributes. What do I need to do? Turn it on? All right, that would be helpful, yes. Is that good? And what's the D stand for? Design of the universe. There is fine-tuning in the universe that is so precise that allows for life Only a designer could bring it about. Chance could not have brought it about. And so that's what we talked about last week. And tonight I'm going to be talking about why we think the Bible is historically reliable. That's going to be our discussion tonight. And so in discussing that, my focus is going to be primarily on the New Testament. And here's the reason why. One, I have a limited amount of time. And secondly, because next week we're going to be talking about Jesus and the resurrection, and you find Jesus and the resurrection in the New Testament. Hence the reason why I'll focus on the New Testament tonight. I'll touch a little bit on the Old Testament. My focus will be on the New Testament itself. And I want to set the groundworks very well, and so you understand what I'm trying to demonstrate tonight. I'm only going to be trying to show that the Bible is historically reliable. I'm not going to try to demonstrate that it's infallible, inerrant, God-inspired, written by God, though I believe all those things and I have good reasons to think those things. But I don't have to get that to get the truth of Christianity, quite honestly. All I have to show is that the New Testament is historically reliable. And if I do that, then I can know information about Jesus, what he said, what he did, and then find out if he actually rose from the dead, demonstrating his claims to be true. And that's all I have to really do. Now, to do that, I think there are 4 good reasons to think the Bible is historically reliable. And as you recall last week, at the very beginning, I taught you a few, choice words, with other religions, so they can share in our foul language, like Buddha dang it, holy Shiva, those kind of things, remember? And I got another acronym for you, and it's sort of close, it's sort of edgy, but they invited me back again this week, so they're in for it. But the 4 reasons why we think the Bible is reliable is dating of the New Testament. When was the New Testament written? The M in this acronym is the manuscript evidence, and then we have an A, archaeological evidence, and then N, non-biblical sources. Almost sounds like you're cussing, but don't do it. You're in church, okay? So it's demand. There's a lot of evidence for the reliability of the Bible. Look, I'm trying to help, you memorize this remember this kind of information, because a lot of it can come at you quite quickly, but I try to get something that's sort of tangible, sort of little peg holes for you to grasp onto and to hang on to, and that's what we're going to be looking at. So let's take a look at the first letter in demand. There's a lot of evidence for the reliability of the Bible. The dating of the New Testament. That's what we're going to be looking at. And we need to ask, when was the New Testament written? Right? If it was written hundreds of years after the life of Christ, it cannot be a reliable source of information about his life, can it? But if it was written relatively close to the life of Jesus, then it could possibly be a good source of information. I do have a short video. It's about 2.5 minutes long. This is a video from William Lane Craig. This is a guy that you need to get to know. This is a Christian who is crazy smart. He doesn't have 1 PhD. He has 2 PhDs. All right, I'm working on one right now. I'm thinking about dropping out. It is very difficult. All right? And he has 2 PhDs, is what he has. In fact, I'm looking at the guy and go, dude, you must not have a social life, right? Kind of thing. And so, because I barely have one with getting to my 1. But he has a family. He travels the world. He gives presentations. One of the interesting things he does is he debates any atheist that is willing to debate him. But he has one condition. They have to have a PhD as well. Now, I want you to notice something about that. He doesn't just debate any atheist that doesn't really know anything and sort of like stack the deck in his favor in a debate. He says, I will only debate an atheist that has a PhD. And so he actually takes on the toughest thinkers on the planet. He has debated on every continent except Antarctica, because there's only penguins there, right? There's no one to debate there. But he's debated on every continent. He's debated Muslims. He's debated atheists, secular humanists, and the like. And so he's a great thinker, right? And so he's going to show us the reasons why we think the New Testament was written relatively early in this short video clip.
I often hear students say, well, you can't know anything that happened 2,000 years ago. And what they fail to understand is that the crucial gap is not the gap between the time of the evidence and today. The crucial gap is the gap between the evidence and the events described by that evidence. If the gap between the events and the evidence for those events is short, then how long it has been since the evidence in those events to the present day is just irrelevant. Good evidence doesn't become bad evidence simply because of the lapse of time. And with regard to the New Testament, when we look at the evidence, what we discover is that these records of the life of Jesus were written down within the first generation after those events, while the eyewitnesses were still alive, with people who had firsthand contact with those who had accompanied Jesus during his lifetime. So that we actually have better sources for the life of Jesus of Nazareth than we do for most of the major figures of antiquity. For example, take Alexander the Great, the great Greek conqueror. Our earliest biographies, earliest sources for Alexander the Great, come from Arrian and Plutarch 400 years after Alexander's death. And yet, Greco-Roman historians still regard these records as fairly trustworthy accounts of the life of Alexander the Great. The fabulous legends about Alexander didn't arise until the centuries following those two authors. And contrast that to the New Testament, where we have books and records that are written within the first generation after the events while the eyewitnesses are still alive. So I think that we have very good evidence for the life of Jesus of Nazareth, very trustworthy evidence, and how long it has been since that evidence till today is simply irrelevant to the reliability and trustworthiness of that evidence.
All right, so what Dr. Craig is saying here is we have very early evidence and source information about the life of Jesus. Now, I want you to notice, just saying it doesn't do what? It doesn't prove it. Thank you very much. We have to give evidence for it. And I want to say something about the nature of evidence in faith in Christianity. Never in the Bible does it separate faith and evidence. They're never divorced in the Bible. In fact, they're associated together. In Hebrews 11, it says, faith is the evidence of things unseen. Notice, that doesn't separate faith and evidence. That associates and marries them together. And so when we have faith, we're not believing without reasons, believing without evidence. In fact, faith is believing in what you know to be true. And that's what we're required to do, according to 1 Peter 3:15, as I stated last week, is to give reasons why we think this is true. So why do we think the New Testament was written in the same century that Jesus lived? So take a look at this little chart, this little timeline. If the New Testament was written hundreds of years after the life of Jesus, then it cannot be a good source of information about his life, because all the eyewitnesses would be what? They'd be dead. And you want information coming from eyewitnesses. But if the New Testament was written in the same century that Jesus lived, then this possibly could be a good source of information about Jesus. So how do we go about demonstrating that the New Testament was written in the first century, the same century that Jesus lived, who lived about 4 BC to about 30 AD, depending on how you date it. And of course, they messed up the calendar back in the Middle Ages because they forgot about leap years or didn't know about it. And when they redid the calendar, we dated about 4 BC to the birth of Jesus, to about 30, 33 AD. So how do we know the New Testament was written in the first century? Well, there's one date that you're really going to have to know tonight, okay? And it's this date right here, 70 AD. Raise your hand if you think you know what happened in 70 AD that was quite important. Probably nobody, right? Here's what happened in 70 AD. In 70 AD, Jerusalem was destroyed by the Roman Empire. Now, if any of you are readers of the Bible, especially the New Testament, you've heard of a group called the Zealots. And the Zealots wanted to do what? They wanted to overthrow Rome, right? Because Israel and the Israelites were under Roman control, and they wanted to be free of Roman control. And they tried to overthrow them. And what's interesting is in 66 AD, the Zealots began to actually take military action against the Roman Empire. And of course, the Roman Empire at the time just had some military outposts and some guards, and the Zealots had some initial success But the Romans said, seriously, this small little squatty little country called Israel that no one wants really to be a part of, going against the superpower of that day, the Roman Empire. And what happened is they sent in a couple of Roman legions following the Roman general Titus, who later became a Roman emperor. And to make a long story short, they just kicked Jewish butt all up and down Israel. I mean, that's the short of it. And we have a very clear record of this event from a guy named Josephus. Josephus is a Roman historian who fought in the Jewish wars. They lost, and they actually captured Josephus, brought him to Rome, and said, you're going to be now the court historian of the Jewish people. And he recorded the war between the Romans and the Jews in a book called The Jewish Wars. He also wrote another book called Jewish Antiquities. We get a lot of our information from Josephus. What's really interesting about this in the Jewish wars between Rome and Israel is in 70 AD, Rome besieged Jerusalem. And they actually conquered it. And they conquered it with such devastation, they tore down the walls and they destroyed the temple, which was the centerpiece of their culture for over 1,000 years. And that temple is still destroyed today. Here's what's interesting about 70 AD. What's most interesting about it is none of you have heard about it because it's nowhere in the Bible, in the New Testament in particular. Now think about this. If it's not recorded in the New Testament, and Christianity got started in Jerusalem, this must mean the New Testament was written when? Before the event, before 70 AD. Which means the New Testament was written in the same century that Jesus lived, within just 20 or 30 years after the life of Jesus. Now, some might ask, well, that's an argument from silence, Steve. How do you know just because they don't record it that it happened before it? Well, if I brought up here a book on the history of New York City, and I said, read this book, and it says nothing about 9/11 in that book on the history of New York City, what do you know about when that book was written? It was written before 9/11, because you would never do a history book on New York City and not include 9/11, September 11, 2001. You would know it was written before that. I actually own a book on the history of New York City, and it was published in 1997, and it obviously doesn't include the 9/11 event because it was written before that. And I'm just going to let you on a secret. As bad as September 11th was in American history, it paled in comparison to what happened in Jerusalem in 70 AD. Because at the end of the day, on September 11th, we still had a country. New York City still stood. But at the end of the day, in 70 AD, Jerusalem was completely devastated. They destroyed the walls, they destroyed the temple. Then they rounded up all the Jewish leaders, kicked them out of the country of Israel, and said, you can't even be a country any longer. And Israel ceased to be a nation for almost 2,000 years. And that didn't happen to America on September 11, 2001. So this is really good evidence to show the New Testament was written in the same century that Jesus lived. There's other evidence to know that the New Testament was written in the same century, but I'll let you look at that on my website, which I record and provide evidence there. But I need to move on to the next acronym. So we had D, the dating of the New Testament in the same century that Jesus lived, meaning eyewitnesses are alive when they write the information down. What's the M stand for? Y'all remember? Manuscript evidence. All right, the manuscript evidence. Now, let me let you in on a secret. It's really not a secret. You just don't know about it yet. Actually, anyone who studies it knows this information. When it comes to the Bible, if you got like a Bible in front of you, that's not what was originally written. That's a print, right? It's a copy of it, right? And really, the original documents are called autographs. Now, you've heard the word autograph before because when you go to like a sports game or a concert, you get this athlete or the singer's autograph, an original writing. And really, sports stars and people that are saying they get sports stars autographs, they're borrowing from manuscript evidence is what they're looking at. Now, when it comes to the New Testament, the original documents, like the parchment that John wrote on, his gospel on, is called an autograph. Or when Peter wrote 1st or 2nd Peter, That parchment is called an autograph. Now, interestingly enough, we don't have any autographs of the New Testament. They're all gone. And some people might find that quite upsetting. I remember when I learned that we had no autographs of the New Testament, I said, well, how do we know what they wrote? Now, before you just dump the whole thing, you have to realize something. There's not an original autograph of any ancient document on the planet. There's no original autographs of Plutarch, where we get information about Alexander the Great. We don't have the original autographs of Plato's writing, Aristotle's writing. We don't have the original autograph of Caesar's Gallic Wars, his military exploits in France, which they still read at West Point for military strategy. We don't have the original autographs for Thucydides, who gives us the story of the Peloponnesian War between Sparta and Athens. We don't have the original autographs of Herodotus, the father of history, where we get a lot of our history. We don't have the original autographs of Tacitus, where you learn about your Roman emperors in Roman history. We don't have the original autographs of any ancient document on the planet. All ancient documents are in the same boat. They don't have the autographs. But what do they have? Before they lost it, they made a manuscript or a copy to manually scribe. That's what manuscript means, to manually scribe something. And so they made copies of it. And what we need to ask ourselves is, can we trust the manuscripts? And how do you go about trusting manuscripts anyways if it's a copy? Because when people write, they're going to tend to do what? Being human. They're going to mess up. Have you ever taken notes in class? And then when you go home to study your notes, you're like, I have no idea what I just wrote. Right? Anybody ever done that before? Right? You make a mistake. So what we have to ask ourselves is, do we have good manuscripts, and how do we determine what the manuscripts are saying about the original? So here's the question I want to ask. Do you want to have a lot of manuscripts or very few manuscripts? What do you think? Raise your hand if you think you want to have a lot of manuscripts. Raise your hand if you say, no, I just want a few manuscripts. All right, the answer is you want a lot. That's what you want. Why do you think you want a lot of manuscripts? You can do what with them? Compare and contrast them is what you can do. All right, let me give you an example so you can understand this, all right? Let's say you got a friend that's not here tonight. But let's say you're taking notes. Who's taking notes? You're taking notes, right? What's your name? Chase is taking notes. And he's probably taking notes for a friend, right? And so when his friend takes Chase's notes, if Chase makes a mistake, is there any way his friend can know it just looking at Chase's notes? No, but what could his friend do? Yeah, go find someone else who's taking notes. Like, who else is taking notes, right? Anybody else saying? Right there, you're taking notes. So he takes Chase's notes, and what's your name? Lydia's, and then what's your name? What? Caitlin. And if your friend, Chase, lays down all three of those copies, no one would make the exact same mistake, would they? Because you're not copying each other, but they can actually reproduce the original with a high degree of confidence. So we want a lot of manuscripts for the New Testament. So the question is, how many manuscripts of the New Testament do we have? So that's what this next slide is about, is how many manuscripts that we have. And the truth is, we have over 5,800 manuscripts of the New Testament. That's a lot of manuscripts, quite honestly. This is the most frustrating PowerPoint that I have to put together because every year we discover more manuscripts all the time. It's really, really cool, right? Because I always have to keep up, and then I got to go in and change the number, and sometimes I'm just like, oh, forget it. You know, it's actually more than 5,838 right now because I'm just sort of behind on on the manuscript count. Now, is that a lot or a little compared to other ancient documents? Let's take Homer's Iliad. Who had to read the Iliad in high school? Right? One of you, two of you. Or maybe I should take it like this. Who was supposed to read the Iliad in high school? You didn't read it, you like Googled it or watched some YouTube video and a summary on it. I mean, that's what I did. Well, how many manuscripts of Homer's Iliad do we have? We have 1,757. And let me add something to Homer's Iliad. That is the second most manuscripts of the ancient world. Who's the first? The New Testament. This is touchdown Jesus time, right? It's a touchdown, right? We have way more manuscripts than any other ancient document on the planet. All right, so let's take a look at some other ones, because Homer's is not a historically accurate book. It's a fictional myth is what it is. But Thucydides, who gives us the Peloponnesian War, we have 96 manuscripts. For Herodotus, the father of history, we have 109 manuscripts. So we have plenty of manuscripts to compare and contrast to determine what is in the original autograph. So how do they actually know what is in the original, what the original actually says? Let me show you how New Testament scholars, or critics as they're called them, not that they're criticizing anything, but they're thinking critically about their subject. This is how they go about determining what's in the original. So let's say we have an original manuscript, and before it's lost, they make a copy. And then we lose the original manuscript. And it might look like that. That's an actual manuscript of the New Testament. In fact, that's called the John Ryland Fragment. It's the oldest manuscript of the New Testament that we have in our possession. It's in the John Ryland Library at Manchester University in England. It actually is about the size of your palm. It's written on the front and the back from John 18, where Jesus is being tried by Pontius Pilate. It dates to about 125 AD. All right? So this is a very, very old manuscript that we have of the New Testament. Now the question is, if they only made one copy, like our example with Chase, if we only looked at that one copy, we could never know if that's what the original said. But we don't just have one copy of the New Testament. How many do we have? Do you remember the number? Over 5,800. So this is the actual scenario we have. We have the original manuscript, they made a copy, someone else made a copy, someone else made a copy, someone else made a copy. Now I'm not going to put 5,800 little scrolls up there, it'd be too tiny, but let's say this represents, a lot of copies of the New Testament, and then we lose the original. Now here's what's interesting. Did you see that? Remember at the very beginning how beat up this manuscript is? All right, it's torn and cut, maybe a drop of water hits it. And so when I put these little pound signs, see, back in my day, they called them pound signs. No, what do they call them now? Hashtags. I'm still got a MyFace account, So anyways, I'm going to chirp it out later. So anyways, yeah, old fogey jokes right there. So anyways, these little pound signs are, what do you call them again? Hashtags, that's right, hashtags. So let's say that's where it's torn, and where a drop of water hit the page, and what happens when a drop of water hits a page, ink bleeds it all out. Now, if we only had this copy, well, we might guess at what it says. It might say Jesus Christ, it might not, but when you have multiple copies like this, is there any doubt in what the original says? Is anyone under doubt of what it says? No. We know it says Jesus Christ in the original. We're very confident that it says Jesus Christ in the original, is what we actually have. In fact, there's this scholar named Bruce Metzger at Princeton University who actually says we can reproduce the original autograph of the New Testament with a 99.9% degree of accuracy. That is unbelievably good. Now, some of you might say, well, what about that 1.1%? Is any doctrine or belief under question? Not a single doctrine or belief of Christianity is under question because of that 0.1%. What we don't know about the original, that 0.1%, amounts to grammatical differences, word inversions. Let me give an example. In Matthew 1, we have a manuscript that says Jesus Christ. And then in another manuscript, we have a manuscript that says Christ Jesus. Is anyone going to just throw up their hands and go, I guess we don't know what we're talking about? No, no one's going to conclude that. We know it's talking about Jesus Christ. We have another manuscript on Matthew 1 that says just Jesus, another one that just says Christ. But who really cares? At that point, we know who the manuscript is talking about. We technically and academically and intellectually can't know if the original says Jesus Christ, Christ Jesus, Jesus or Christ, but who really cares? Because we know who it's referencing, don't we? That's what that 0.1% difference is in all the manuscripts. Word inversions, grammatical differences, different kind of spellings, Caesarea with one A or two A's and the like. I mean, we know what we're talking about. Now, when it comes to Homer's Iliad, they've actually learned what the percentage degree of accuracy we have of Homer's Iliad with the 1,700 manuscripts we have of it. We can reproduce Homer's Iliad with a 95% degree of accuracy, which is really good. But the next time you take a test on Homer's Iliad, you need to ask for a 5-point curve. And if you take a test on the New Testament, Well, go ahead and ask for that 0.1% curve. I don't think it's really going to help your grade anyways, but we have a great way to reproduce the originals by comparing these manuscripts. But now I want to ask about eyewitness tests. We can get back to the original with a high degree of confidence, especially compared to other ancient manuscripts and documents out there, like Homer's Iliad, Thucydides, Herodotus, Caesar's Galaic Wars, Plutarch, Tacitus, and the other ancient documents. But we still have to ask this question. Did they write it down accurately in the first place? Because if they just made copies of falsehoods or errors or fabrications, then it doesn't matter if we can reproduce the original with a 99.9% degree of accuracy. So do we know that they wrote the information down in the first place accurately? And there's two reasons I think we can know that the New Testament was written down accurately. One, it's called eyewitness test or an internal test, and the first test is called embarrassing detail. Now, what do I mean by embarrassing detail? Well, if you've ever read the New Testament and you've followed sort of the disciples as they, followed Jesus, it looks like a comedy of errors, doesn't it? I mean, they go to Jesus and they say to him, hey, Jesus, you taught this parable, but we don't understand what you're saying, right? Or when Jesus is arrested, what does Peter do? He denies Jesus 3 times. Or when they arrest Jesus, all of them hide, don't they? I mean, this looks like a comedy of errors. Now, what's interesting about this is if you're going to lie, think about this. When you lie, are you trying to make yourself look good or look bad to the person you're lying to? I mean, what's the point of lying? Your intent in lying, if you lie. I know no one here lies, right? But what is the intent in lying? You obviously lie to make yourself look good. No, I mean, seriously, that's what you do. Now, here's what's interesting. If the writers of the New Testament are fabricating this information, why do they make themselves look like fools? Have you ever thought about that? Jesus didn't write the New Testament, the disciples did, right? I mean, seriously, I can imagine when Peter is sitting down with Mark, who Mark used Peter as a source of information for his gospel. This would just be bizarre if Mark just said, hey, you know what? Let's just make up Jesus calling you Satan. I mean, Peter would probably be like, no, I don't really like that. That's not really good. Or how about this? We're going to have the disciples fall asleep on Jesus 3 times. I mean, they just look foolish, don't they? The fact that there's so many embarrassing details about the disciples, the ones that are writing it, it's a good indication they're telling the truth. Because if you're going to fabricate something, you make yourself look good, not bad. I mean, have you ever heard a preacher give an altar call like this? Hey, come follow Jesus. I denied him 3 times. Yeah, I mean, I would sit down with Hadley and say, you need to work on that altar call. It's not working for you, man. I mean, seriously. Hey, follow Jesus. He called me Satan. Well, maybe we don't need to listen to you anymore, But that's what they wrote in the New Testament, didn't they? The fact that they included these kind of embarrassing details is an indication they're telling the truth, is what they're doing. Another indication they're telling the truth in the New Testament is what I call divergent detail. Right? Not Divergent, the movie or book by Veronica Roth, but divergent means differing details between the Gospels. Now, how many Gospels do we have? Y'all remember? 4. What are they? Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Now, a lot of times when we read the New Testament Gospels, we read them from beginning to end, and then when you finish one, you go to the next one and read it beginning to end. Right? That's what we call sort of like vertical reading, right? You read straight through, then you go to the next one, then you go to the next one. What I am pointing out with divergent detail is a horizontal reading. When you read one event in one of the Gospels, compare it to another event in the Gospel. And what's interesting is they don't tell that story in the exact same way. Now, I've actually had people say, well, look at that. They differ. They must contradict, and it can't be true. Well, that's actually not the case. Because when people tell the truth, they tell it in different ways, depending on who's telling it and who they're telling it to. Let me demonstrate, all right, with an example. Have you noticed, like when you watch like detective genre TV shows, that when they get some perps, right? I got the lingo down, right? You know, they get some perps. When they interrogate them, they don't interrogate them in the same room, but in different rooms. And one of the things detectives have learned is if these perpetrators or possible criminals tell the exact same story in the exact same way, with the exact same detail, with the exact same emphasis, they are lying. Because no one does that. When you tell a story, you're going to emphasize different things is what you're going to do. In fact, you don't even tell the story in order, do you? Have you ever told a story and you're talking and you say, wait a minute, I forgot this one part, and you back the story up and you tell it and then you continue on? Have you ever done that before? That's just the way we naturally tell things. But if you fabricate something, there's only one way to tell it, the way you fabricated it. And they don't write it the exact same way. For example, in Matthew, when the women went to the empty tomb, they discovered that there was one angel there. But in John, when it's recounting the empty tomb story that the women show up to, there's two angels there. I've actually read on the internet, said there's a contradiction, therefore that's a lie. Well, the story's not about how many angels. The story's about the tomb being empty. In fact, what we learn is John fills in details that Matthew leaves out, which you'd expect if they're telling the truth, right? The fact of the matter is, when you read Matthew, it doesn't say one angel was there. It says an angel spoke, and Matthew was only concerned with the one that was talking. And then when you read John, John fills in the details and say, oh yeah, there were actually two angels there, and one of them spoke to the women. And we have that kind of variation in detail, don't we? All the time, and that's what we expect. It's like this. If you talk to me about my marriage, I've been married 21 years now, right, to a lovely wife named Angela, and if you talk to me about my marriage ceremony, I would be talking about how beautiful my wife is. That's about all I would really remember about that event, quite honestly. But if you talked about my wife about the marriage, she'd be talking about her dress, the bridesmaids' dresses, the candles, the flowers, the music. I have no idea what song was sung on that day because my wife was hot and that's all I was really concerned about, right? Of course, if you talked to me and my wife, you'd have such divergent details, you'd say, you're not even married. But the fact of the matter is, we're going to emphasize different things, and that's just the natural way of telling the truth. Is you emphasizing you're going to have this kind of divergent detail, which we do have in the New Testament. So we got the dating of the New Testament is in the first century, the century that you want it to be. The manuscript evidence is there to reproduce the original autograph with a high degree of accuracy. We have internal evidence that they're telling us the truth with embarrassing detail and divergent detail. But what does the A stand for in demand? Y'all remember? Archaeological evidence. So let's take a look at archaeological evidence. I don't have a lot of time to talk about a lot of archaeological discoveries. This is so fascinating. In fact, one of our filmer right now, Clint, he was in Israel 3 weeks ago, or you were there 3 weeks, a couple of weeks ago, where he got to look at a lot of this archaeological evidence. I'm very jealous, by the way, right? I talk about this all the time, and I've never been there. But let's take a look at some archaeological evidence. Now, archaeology is digging up human artifacts and sort of like, oh, that's a human artifact and not, a rock, right? And it's just a pottery shard. And what they would be interesting is since the New Testament describes cities and countries and towns and islands, and they even describe buildings and the way the buildings even looked, it would be fun to see if archaeologists have dug up this building and the building they dig up looks like the building that's described in the New Testament. That would be interesting if they could do that. So what kind of archaeological evidence do we have in the New Testament? Here's one. This is from the Old Testament, Hezekiah's tunnel. All right, back in the Old Testament, I think it's in 2 Kings, Hezekiah was going to be attacked. He was the king of Israel by an outside force. And they were going to besiege the city of Jerusalem then as well. And what he did is before they came into his country, he dug a tunnel to bring an outside water source from outside the walls of Jerusalem to the inside walls of the Jerusalem. And it was underground, obviously, that's why it's called a tunnel, right? And that way it wouldn't be discovered by the enemy when they besieged them. Well, about 40 or 50 years ago, guess what? We discovered Hezekiah's tunnel, and you can walk it. Did you see Hezekiah's tunnel, by the way?
No, but the archaeology I saw was overwhelming.
It is overwhelming. It would be, I mean, look, I don't think it'd be all that fun because you're walking in water, you know, that's like knee deep, you know, it's not like, you know, oh, that'd be gross kind of thing. Oh, no water shoes or anything. Very good. I mean, it's not like drinkable water now. It was made like over 2,000, 3,000 years ago, you know, kind of thing, but it still carries water today. And see, this is the kind of evidence you'd find in archaeology is if the Bible is telling the truth. If it didn't tell the truth, you wouldn't expect an archaeological discovery like that. Or like this one. This one is from David, the House of David inscription. For generations, skeptics thought David was a mythological figure, sort of like Romulus and Remus of Rome, or Robin Hood of England, or King Arthur of England, or Roland of France. Sort of a made-up individual, you know, about their ancient past. But then in the 1960s, or actually this is 1990s, they found this rock that has the House of David inscription in which scholars can never again say David didn't exist. Because right there, it talks about the House of David, his kingdom, is what he's referencing. All right? So, earliest mention of King David outside of the Bible, which some scholars had held to be a fictional character. Here's an interesting one about Pontius Pilate. Pontius Pilate is the one that tried Jesus and actually condemned him to crucifixion. All right? In Caesarea Maritima, which is right on the Mediterranean coast of Israel, on a building, they have this plaque or Pontius Pilate inscription that lists Pontius Pilate as the procreator or ruler of Israel. And I don't know if you can see it, but he ruled from 26 to 36 AD, which crosses over whose dates? Jesus, exactly. The exact dates that Jesus lived, which you'd expect if the New Testament was telling the truth. Here's another archaeological discovery of Caiaphas's ossuary. Caiaphas was the high priest of the Sanhedrin. And an ossuary is basically a bone box, or for a lack of a better word, a coffin. And what they would do is they would bury them, let them rot for about a year, and then they'd collect the bones and put them in this bone box. And this is a very ornate bone box, right? Most bone boxes were very flat, very just not decorated at all, but this was ornately decorated. They'd usually have flat tops with this as a dome top, right? Very ornate, and you can't see it very well, but right there is the name Caiaphas, who was the high priest that actually arrested Jesus and had him brought before Pontius Pilate. And when we opened up the top of this ossuary, we found his bones. See, this is the kind of stuff you'd expect to find if the New Testament was telling the truth. Or another one, this is the Pool of Siloam, where Jesus actually performed his miracle of healing the blind man from John 9. Remember this story? I mean, Jesus, he goes up to the blind guy, he spits into the dirt, makes some mud, sticks it in his eye, and you're like, Jesus, dude, hygiene, that's gross, right? And he says, go wash out in the pool. And he washes out and he's healed. This is where that miracle took place. Look, if you're making this stuff up, you don't put that kind of precision for people to find out that it's false. Because when they write about it, they could go and say, hey, were you here when Jesus did that miracle? They could actually verify or falsify the information. And if you're going to make it up, when you lie, you make it vague and ambiguous so people can't follow up and to uncover your lie. But the fact that they're putting this kind of detail is a good reason to think the New Testament is telling the truth. Archaeology has confirmed the following in the New Testament. 84 different facts have been confirmed in the book of Acts through archaeological and historical research. Luke names 11 historical figures, 12 if you include Jesus, in the first 3 chapters alone that have been confirmed outside of the New Testament in archaeological research. 59 different facts in the Gospel of John have been confirmed through archaeological evidence. In fact, there's this one archaeologist that you need to be aware of named John McRae, because quite honestly, the extent of my archaeological expertise is digging in my sandbox when I was a kid. John McRae is an archaeologist. He's actually teaches archaeology in the New Testament at Wheaton University. He's actually done archaeological digs in Israel, and look what he says. He says, archaeology has not produced anything that is unequivocally a contradiction to the Bible. I want you to notice this. There has never been an archaeological discovery that's contradicted the Bible. I was actually reading the other day, there have been 30,000 archaeological discoveries that relate to the Bible, and not a single one contradicts the Bible. Rather, they affirm and build our confidence in it. Look, if there were 30,000 archaeological discoveries and maybe 10 or 20 contradicted the Bible, it'd still mean archaeology confirms the Bible. But not a single one. In fact, we're so confident in the historical reliability of the New Testament that we publish a monthly magazine called the Biblical Archaeological Review. And the sole reason that magazine is published is to keep up with all the archaeological discoveries that relate to the Bible. In fact, we're so confident that the New Testament is accurate that we produce a study Bible. You've seen these study Bibles, like you have student study Bible, you got the fireman study Bible, you got the dog owner study Bible, all those kind of weird study Bibles out there. But there's this one study Bible called the Archaeological Study Bible. And all it does is in the notes and the margins of the biblical, in the margins of the biblical text, is relate that text to an archaeological discovery. I'm letting you in on a secret. They're never going to produce an archaeological Book of Mormon. They're not going to produce an archaeological Quran or an archaeolocal Bhagavad Gita of all these other religions. But we do produce the Archaeological Study Bible because archaeology overwhelmingly confirms the New Testament. So what's the N stand for? After D, dating the New Testament, M, manuscript evidence, and A, archaeological evidence. What's the N? Non-biblical sources. This is looking at sources outside of the New Testament. Jewish scholars, maybe a Roman scholar, a Roman historian, a Greek historian, and just trying to determine if they actually confirm what the Bible says when they overlap in what they write about, even though they're not necessarily writing about the life of Jesus. So does it confirm or contradict the New Testament? Non-Christian sources, the following non-Christian sources mention the life of Jesus. Josephus, the Jewish historian of the Roman war. Tacitus, a Roman historian who gives us our information about most Roman emperors. Pliny the Younger, a Roman governor. Lucian, a Greek historian. Suetonius, a Greek satirist. And Thales, a Greek historian as well, all mentioning the name of Jesus. In fact, if we took away the New Testament, let's say we lost all the manuscripts of the New Testament, what information could we find out about the life of Jesus just from secular testimony? We would know Jesus was crucified by Pontius Pilate at Passover time. We would know the disciples believed that Jesus rose on the third day, that the church leaders charged Christ with sorcery. That's Jesus doing what? Doing miracles. Christianity spread into all of Rome. That's the book of Acts. Nero and other Roman rulers persecuted the Christians. Early Christians denied polytheism and lived dedicated lives according to the lives of Jesus and worshiped Christ as God. All from secular, non-biblical testimony. This is congruent with the New Testament. It does not contradict. It's not the New Testament in all the details, but it is in a nutshell. It's basically your Cliff Note version of the New Testament is what it is. So I think we have 4 good reasons to think the New Testament is historically reliable. 1, the dating of the New Testament. It was written in the 1st century, the same century that Jesus lived, which you'd want for a reliable document. The manuscript evidence. We have more manuscripts than any other ancient document on the planet, and our manuscripts are closer to the original than any other ancient document. Archaeology has never contradicted the Bible, but continually, again and again and again, confirms the New Testament. And non-Christian sources actually provide congruent evidence of the story of the life of Jesus in a nutshell. So there's a lot of evidence for the New Testament. And that's why I take it as a historically reliable document. And what I'll do next week is we're going to dig in to see what Jesus said and what did he do to confirm that what he says is true. Now, if you're interested, you can look at the more detail into my website, ischristianitytrue.wordpress.com. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and pull up my the website here. Is it coming up? How do I do this? I think I got to scroll it over. Is it on there? All right, very good. So let me pull it down a little bit. I don't know. It's going to be hard. I think this is good enough. But if you go right up here to where is Christianity true, you click on that, like I showed you last week, you actually have the 4 different reasons why we think Christianity is true. I'm covering 3 of them here with y'all. Does God exist last week? And here is the Bible true. I'll just click on that. And so is the Bible reliable? You'll even find the information demand, different videos, some of the videos you even watched tonight on archaeological manuscript evidence, the dating of the New Testament, and non-biblical sources. All of them are usually under 5 or 6 minutes long, so you can watch them really, really quickly, is what you can do. So I highly encourage you to continue to investigate it. All I've been able to do tonight is introduce sort of a low-level flyover of the information is all I've been able to do. And so next week, we'll take a look at the evidence for the resurrection. I think we're going to transition now into our Q&A, right, that we all been sending in. And so hopefully, Hadley will be able to answer these questions adequately.
All right, before we transition, guys, can you help me appreciate Steve being here to help us out? So, one of the things that we hope you're kind of seeing that's happening is with each week, we're moving from the general and we're getting more specific. So last week, we didn't talk about Jesus, we didn't talk about the Bible, we talked about, is there a God, any God? Is there a superpower out there somewhere? How can we know? Today, we're getting a little more narrow, saying, well, let's talk about the Bible. And you notice we're not talking about a lot of theology, we're talking archaeology and study of history. Is it provable? Next week, I encourage you to be back because really, next week is what we've really been working toward. If we're trying to be able to answer and defend our Christian faith, then we want to be able to especially defend the parts about Jesus and his claims. Because, guys, Jesus made some radical claims. Okay, he said things no one else in history has said, or maybe they've said them, but he backed it up with his death, burial, and resurrection. So it's going to be really critical next week as we close out this series. I hope you'll be back. And next week would be a great week if you've got a friend maybe who doesn't believe or is a skeptic or a doubter. They're not sure. I almost said a scouter. Okay, you like that?
That's pretty accurate
as
well.
That's a skeptic. That's a skeptic who doubts. That's a scouter is who that is.
Scouting it out.
But seriously, bring them next week. And I want to say this again, then we'll go to the questions. This series has not been about giving you ammo so you can go out there and trash your atheist friends. Like they ask you a question, then you just drop a bomb on them, then just walk off the stage, drop the mic, whatever. That's not the goal. This is not about arguing louder or getting in someone's face. If you have friends that you genuinely love and care about and you want to engage them, that's what this has been about. And we have said, people in this room may not believe. You even growing up in church may have questions and doubts and struggles. We want this to be a safe atmosphere where we can have honest dialogue and conversation about, hey, I'm struggling to believe this, and we can get a little more specific. So what we want to do now with the time we have left is go through some of the questions. If you did not reply back, it's too late. Never mind. So we're going to move on here. One of the questions that came up is, and this was kind of a little bit repetitive, but basically the question, I guess, to summarize it, even though it's historically true, how can we know it's the Word of God? Mm-hmm. It's historically true, but does that mean it's inspired by God? How would you respond?
That's a great question. And as I remember, y'all recall, I started by saying I'm only trying to demonstrate tonight that the Bible is historically reliable about the life of Jesus. And then when we find that this is the best source of information that we have about Jesus, then we need to ask the question, what did Jesus say about himself? And this is a lesson that I'm actually not going to get into. It's that 4th lesson on that Is Christianity True section on, is Jesus God? And did he claim to be divine? Now, here's what's interesting. Since Jesus taught things, one of the things you have to ask is, what did he teach? The primary thing that Jesus taught was he was God. Right? He did it in multiple ways. He said, I and the Father are one. If you've seen me, you've seen the Father. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. He didn't say he knew the way, the truth, and the life. He said he was the way, the truth. That's a divine claim. His favorite claim of himself was Son of Man, which everyone in the Jewish context knew that's a reference to Daniel 7, which says the Son of Man will come on a cloud of glory to judge the living and the dead, which only God has the authority to judge the living and the dead. Now, the question you have to ask yourself is, since obviously Jesus claimed to be God, that doesn't necessarily make you God. Lots of people have actually said they're God. I mean, David Koresh down in Waco back in the 90s said he was God, and he got burned up, right? So how do you know that Jesus is God? Now, one of the things I want you to notice, you can never say the following about Jesus. You can never say he's just a good teacher. Don't ever say that about Jesus. That's insulting, because what did Jesus teach? He taught that he was God. So you got some options here, and your options are the following. Either he is God, or he is a legend, he is a liar, or he is a lunatic. Those are your four options, the four L's, right? I'm always about the acronyms, right? If he's a legend, it means we don't know anything about him. I've demonstrated tonight that's not a possibility. We can know things about Jesus because of the historical evidence of the New Testament. Is he a liar? Now think about it. If Jesus is lying about God, he can't be a what? A good teacher, right? Because if you're lying, you're not good, you're bad, the opposite of good. So he can't be a good teacher. Or he's what's the other? Legend, liar, lunatic. He's crazy. Now, if he is mentally insane, you wouldn't want to call him a good teacher, would you? Because no one goes to an insane asylum, a mental institution, for good, solid teaching from the inmates, right? That's why you don't do that. So your options are either legend, liar, lunatic, or Lord, but never a good teacher. That's insulting because you're not paying attention to what's going on. So what happens is now we have to ask, is there any evidence to demonstrate that his claim is accurate? And that's the resurrection. Because Jesus said he was God, he predicted his own death and resurrection, and if he did it, it affirms that Jesus is God. Now, if Jesus affirms that he's God, everything Jesus says is true. And he tells us the Bible is the Word of God, and that the Holy Spirit will lead people to produce the New Testament, is what they will do. That's how you get the Bible being actual God's Word, and not just a historically reliable document.
So basically, start with the historical evidence,
yes,
archaeological evidence. If that's true, well, then maybe the claims in the Bible are true as well. So start with the more general and then gradually move. And we said this before too, guys. You're not going to have one conversation, in a matter of a few minutes and change someone's mind. I'm not saying that can't happen. It's not very likely. I've never heard of someone being converted who was an atheist and they're standing in the lunch line and see lunch, and then, by the time they get to the line to get their food, they're like, I was an atheist, but now I believe. Someone converted me in 3 minutes. Probably not. But if you're having these conversations over a period of time in the context of relationship, then you can revisit these things. And that's why I encourage you guys, go back, watch these videos, visit the resource. We're going to send the site out again, just like we did last week. But continue to study and continue to familiarize yourself with what it is we believe, not just theologically, but in terms of the history. So here's a question. What about the crazy miracles we see in the Scripture? So someone could say, okay, the history is accurate, but these miracles like a talking donkey, angels in the sky, a floating axe head, a Red Sea parting, a dead man rising. Don't the claims of miracles discredit the Bible, because a lot of those we don't see today. So doesn't that lend itself to being not true if the claims seem crazy?
Yeah, that's a great question. There is only one miracle I defend in the Bible, and that is going to be the resurrection. Because if the resurrection is true, then the other miracles aren't that problematic, are they? In fact, we actually demonstrated that miracles are possible last week, because God created the universe. And if he created the universe, guess what he could do in the universe? He could do a miracle. That would be, look, if you created the entire known cosmos, tinkering with it would not be problematic, right? So I don't actually go around defending every miracle in the Bible, because look, I'll be honest. If I get every miracle in the Bible, but I do not get the resurrection, I do not get Christianity. And so I don't even try to defend any miracle in the Bible except for the resurrection. That's the miracle I need to determine if Christianity is true or not. If he did not rise from the dead, it doesn't matter what the rest of the book says. If he did rise from the dead, then the rest of the book is true because he said it was true, right?
So if someone's asking you about this miracle, that miracle, you would say, take them to the resurrection.
Yes.
And just like you said, and I like it because you said it in the PowerPoint, there is no archaeological evidence that can discredit the Bible. So that's where you can turn it back on them, guys. In a respectful tone. But if someone says, well, I don't believe in miracles, well, what about the resurrection? Jesus rose from the dead. Well, where's the evidence he rose from the dead? I would say, where's the evidence he didn't? Find me a body. If he's dead, where's the body? You find me a body. So really the burden should be on them, not on us, because they're the ones saying the miracle didn't happen.
Yeah.
And so that's just a way you can handle that. To those who are here who would say, okay, that was loud, all right. They've never read the Bible. They don't understand the Bible. It's confusing. It's weird. It doesn't make sense. What would you say is a good place for them to get started? How can they just grow in their own knowledge of the Bible?
Oh, I would start with the Gospels. Any of the Gospels. I actually like starting with the book of Mark because it's the shortest. Right? You know, shorter is always better in my book, right? And so I would start with the book of Mark, right? The Gospel of Mark, because that is the focus of Christianity. It's who Jesus is. And so you want to really delve into the life of Jesus. What did he teach about himself? And much more importantly, I think when you begin to read the Bible, you don't need to read the Bible and say, what can I get out of it? What is it saying about me? Because that's a very narcissistic way to read the Bible, making it all about yourself. When you read the Bible, you need to be asking one question. What does this say about Jesus? What does this reveal about Jesus? I mean, that's why it was written. So start with the book of Mark. Read through the book of Mark, and then read it again. Is what I would do. It's a quick book. It's 16 chapters. It's about 18 pages, you know, in a book. I mean, seriously, it's not that long. You could actually read the Gospel of Mark in a week or 2 weeks if you take your time, maybe a chapter a day, and you could begin to work through that and begin to let the life of Jesus reveal to you the truth, right? And you'll find out that Jesus makes very different claims about himself and about reality and what he's saying. And he's saying that you're not going to find the kingdom of God within yourself, or you're going to find the way to heaven through your own actions or efforts. He's going to be saying that you find it in him alone, is what you begin to find out. So that's where I would start, as the book of Mark, is what I would do.
What about if you're engaging in a conversation with someone, how would you personally deal with this? Someone who says, okay, the Bible is true, but they flat out reject it for themselves personally. Like they're not even disputing the fact. This is maybe more of a theological question. They're not disputing the truth of the Bible, but they just say, I don't want to live by that. How would you as a Christian, I guess this may even be more of a Christian to Christian issue versus Christian to atheist. Someone says, I believe it's God's word, I don't want to live under that. As a Christian, how would you respond to that?
Well, I think this is an indication that they don't really actually care about the truth. It's not an intellectual objection that they have against the truth of Christianity. It's a volitional or a free will issue. It's they just don't want to answer to it. And I want to be quite honest. I mean, I'm assuming most of the people here are Christians, but there might not be. Maybe some of you are scouts, as you were saying earlier, right? But if you're one of those skeptics, or you're just wondering to see if Christianity is true or not, or maybe you're one of those that say, there's no way I'm going to believe in Christianity. Let me ask this question. If there was evidence to show it's true, if Christianity really was true, would you be willing to believe it? I've actually gone to events where actually that question is asked, or I've asked that question, if it was true, would you believe it? And I've heard people shout out, no. Then why are they there? They don't care about the truth. They're only concerned about themselves and the way they want to live. I can pray for the individual, but let me ask this. If you're an atheist, I want you to actually look internally right now why you don't believe, why you actually don't think Christianity is true. I think there's two possible reasons why you might think Christianity is false or you don't want to believe. One is you've lacked a father figure, or you've had a bad father figure. They have actually done psychological studies. Paul Vitz at NYU, New York University, a psychologist there, actually wrote a book called The Faith of the Fatherless. And one of the things he's learned is those that are atheists lack a father figure. And it's very difficult to actually trust an authority figure when your upbringing authority figure has abandoned you. Or secondly, another reason you might actually be an atheist or a non-believer is because you don't want it to be true, because you want to live the way you want to live. And so it has nothing to do with the truth, has nothing to do with the evidence for you. But is that a good way to live? Is that really the way that you want to? And I actually am going to say this. Become a Christian not because of what you get out of it. Become a Christian because it's true. That's the only reason I stand here before you. When I was 19 years old and I went off to college, went up to University of North Texas, right? Grew up a Christian, went to church all my life, right? made a profession of faith at 17, a little later in life, you know, even though growing up and in the church. But when I hit 19, I began to see all these different religions and different groups and the pluralistic, you know, atmosphere of the university. I began to wonder, why am I a Christian? Is there any reason to think it's true? And I literally took my Christian faith and put it on a shelf. And I said, I am going to study all the major world religions and major philosophies, and whatever turns out with the most evidence, that's what I'll become. And if it's not Christianity, so be it. There is nothing virtuous about believing that which is false. And so I just spent about a year of my life analyzing Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, atheism, secular humanism, existentialism, and began to look at the arguments and evidence of each of these. Obviously, I came out on the other side a Christian because the evidence points in the favor of Christianity. And that was when I was 19. I'm 46 now, so I'm pushing 30 years of continuing to do this research. Look, when there's a new book by an atheist out, guess what? I buy it, I read it. And when there's a new book out on the truth of Buddhism, trying to argue for it, look, I read it. I don't put my head in the sand and only read those Christian philosophers or Christian theologians. I actually put my faith to the test almost every day. And I'm telling you, Christianity stands strong in the light of the evidence. So don't become a Christian because you get something out of it. It's a very selfish reason to do something. Become a Christian because it's true. That's why you need to become a Christian.
Yeah, and I want to echo something you said, where some people, when you've asked the question, if you could prove that it was true, would you believe it? And they say no. I like what Dr. Robert Jeffress says, that an atheist is not looking for God the same reason that a robber is not looking for a cop. Mm-hmm. He doesn't want to find him. He doesn't want to run into him.
That's true.
And so sometimes I think we feel, maybe you felt this, it's your responsibility, your job to save someone, to convince them that it all rests on you. I would argue that we are to be a part of that process, but ultimately, guys, we're just a vessel. We've never saved anyone. God has to do that work. And I think about when Jesus, now think about this. Jesus hung on a cross while the religious leaders of his day mocked him, made fun of him, scoffed at him. I have often thought, when Jesus rose from the dead, you would think the first people he would go to would be all the ones that were talking trash to him when he was on the cross. Like I come walking out of the tomb saying, where are those fools at? I'm about to show them I'm God, right? He doesn't do that. He doesn't do that. And I think the reason for it is because Jesus knew even coming back from the dead, they would not believe. He didn't waste his time. So we want to be clear on this. There are going to be some people that you will try to engage with them. If they're not interested in the truth, move on. And we don't say that to be cold, to be callous. We're not saying don't pray for them. We're just saying in conversations like these, and you ask the question, if you don't want to know the truth, then why are you here? If they don't want to know the truth, then don't force it on them, because that just makes them even that much more determined to not believe. Let me ask one more question, and this is kind of maybe peripheral in its nature. Your website is a great resource, obviously the Bible itself, but for any of our students here who say, I really want to know why I believe what I believe. I really want to be smart in conversations like this. I don't want to just believe, something that was handed to me. I want to believe because there's evidence. What resource, if you could narrow it down to maybe 2 or 3, just like, man, these are great, great resources for those that are serious and wanting to really latch on to this. What are some great resources for apologetics?
Look, I would start with one, and really what you need to do, it's great to go to the website and watch some videos, but if you're really wanting to go in depth and really understand what's going on, you got to read. You got to be a reader, all right? There's no way around it.
What about audiobooks?
Yes, there is an audiobook for the book I'm about to mention, which you can, right? And in the book that I would mention, and one book that I like to say, if you're interested in the truth of Christianity, I'll let you send that out, right? And I'll let you pay for the book, right? But the name of the book is I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. What a provocative title. I just love that title. It's written by Frank Turek and Norman Geisler. Two scholars, both have doctorate degrees, one from the University of Loyola in Chicago and one from Southern Evangelical Seminary. But this is a great book, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. It starts from complete skepticism, doesn't even assume truth is true, and it argues all the way to the truth of the resurrection and Christianity. It's a great read, starting from nothing all the way to the fullness of Christianity, providing evidence all along the way, never saying, hey, you just got to believe this one. Trust me on this. They never say that. They always back it up. It's a great book. I use it actually for my 11th grade apologetics class that I teach at Prestonwood. Let me tell a story about this book. It is a great book. I remember when I first assigned the book, one of my students took it home. He had to read it, and I quizzed them over it, so they have to read it, kind of thing. But he actually was sitting there at home, and his brother, who was in college, who hadn't left for college yet, saw the book, and he stole it. Took it to college with him. And when he took it to college, he left it out in his dorm room, and one of his roommates was an atheist. And of course, he sees this title, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, and he starts reading it when his roommate's not there. Come to find out, when the semester's over, he becomes a Christian reading the book. So what does this tell us? It tells us we need to steal more books. No, I'm just kidding. All right? Hadley's going to buy you
Some
the
of
book,
them, that's
right?
all they're going to remember. He told me to steal books.
So anyways, yeah, I need to edit that one out of the video. So, but anyways, that's a great place to start. I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. That's a great beginning.
So here's what
book.
we'll do. We may not can have it by next week, but what we'll do, we're going to buy several copies of that book, and next week, if we can get them in time, or the week after, we'll give those away as a part of our
that'd be
giveaways
great.
at night. We'll invest that back in the students.
That'd be great. Now,
Yeah.
that's the beginning book.
Yeah.
There's one other book I want to mention.
Okay.
All right. Another book I want to mention is called On Guard by William Lane Craig. The guy in the video that we watched tonight, that's William Lane Craig. This is a little more advanced. But quite honestly, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist is a beginner's book. The On Guard is more of an intermediate book. This is the one that's going to really provide the hard scientific evidence, the hard archaeological evidence and manuscript evidence. It's much more formidable. But anyone that reads, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist is not going to have any problem with On Guard. Or if you're like in college, I would recommend that book, On Guard, to college students or to grad students as well. But I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist is the book that you really want to start with.
Awesome. Guys, have you appreciated Steve tonight? It's been great. Awesome. Be back next week as he talks about how we can know if Jesus is God, about Jesus' death and resurrection. Is it true? How can we really know? And that's going to be kind of how we land the plane. Let me share a couple of announcements with you. We're going to give away some stuff, and we'll get out of here. Nikki, you want to help me with that? We good there? Okay, awesome. So a couple of announcements. Obviously, I just said it. Next week, be back, our last installment of Answering the Atheist. And if you have a friend who is not a believer, maybe we're not saying they're necessarily an atheist, but they just don't believe, bring them back next week. Just like Steve said, Jesus was not a good teacher. He was not a moral person. He was not a philosopher. But Jesus said some good stuff. We're going to say next week unapologetically, and we're going to prove that Jesus was who he said he was. He was actually God. Reminder, Tuesday night, Underground, that is our small group connection point. On Wednesdays, we gather in here. We have over 100 people pretty much every week. It's difficult to be known, to connect, to get close and build relationships. If you really want to grow and get deeper in your faith, I'm going to push you over and over every week. This will be the last one for April. Be back for our gathering be at Underground on Tuesday, 7 o'clock, okay? Be there for that. Also, our social media, if you are not following us, that's our information there. We'll leave it on the screen. If you didn't sign up for text alerts, there's our Instagram and Twitter, as well as our text alerts. You can sign up for those. Right now, we're going to give away some free stuff. We're going to keep it simple tonight. This is easy because we always hook up a guest, and we have one call.